you got to be kidding me. I don't want to get fired. But then when it happens, people look at you differently, like, hey, you're part of the club now. Hey, we're all in this together. And you don't walk around with that red X on your chest like you do in a college level. It's like, hey, we get hired to get fired. That's how it is.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of I Know This Guy, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of some of the most interesting people I know. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to I Know This Guy wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, my kids want me to say something about ringing a bell. What the hell's a bell?
So, Dad, what do the NBA, country music, and hoteliers have in common?
Yep, you're trying to throw me off here, but I know the answer, and that is Jeff Nix. So Jeff's going to be on the podcast today, and crazy enough, it's a referral from Michael Peterson, but Larry Broughton and him grew up in the same small town. Completely a coincidence. Jeff is going to be talking about his experience in college and the NBA, and also just talking about mentorship and his charities. It's going to be a really cool show.
Yeah, I can't wait. And I guess we're starting to see the network of those podcasts spread out, right? We're seeing all the connections.
The coincidences. It's crazy.
Or we can maybe start another podcast called Everyone Loves Larry.
There we go.
Seems to come up a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, let's dive in.
All right, Jeff. So welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Norm. I'm looking forward to speaking with you and enjoying some time.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. So first of all, how did you were referred to us by Michael Peterson?
That's correct, yes.
How did you get to know him?
Well, probably 20 plus years ago, I was involved living in Indiana, actually, and I went to one of his concerts. And someone that was with me in my inner circle said, hey, I'd love to meet him. So I made contact with his agent, his road manager, and we just kind of met after a show. And you know how you meet someone and initially you say, boy, I hope moving forward that person's in my inner circle as I move forward in my life. And I've been grateful that Michael allowed me in that circle. He's a dear friend, a wonderful man, beyond the talent of a musician. He's an all-star person. And that's kind of how it all evolved. And it's been a great friendship for, like I said, 20 plus years.
Well, he was a joy to have on the podcast, a real gentleman. But you also told me, this is interesting, because there was no connection, there was no referral, but you know Larry Broughton.
I do. Larry and I went to high school together. I graduated with his brother, Brian, and then his twin brother, Barry. They were about 3 years behind me in high school, but from a small little town, Portville, New York, about 65 miles south of Buffalo, New York, on the Pennsylvania border. Wouldn't change growing up there for anything in the world. It was a great experience, good people, hardworking people. And Larry was a part of that environment growing up also. So he's had tremendous success in his life, and I'm happy that he's moved and has had some great experiences.
Yeah. And you just mentioned being close to Buffalo. So I've grown up most of my life in around that Lake Ontario region. And I wonder if you remember that snowstorm, the 7-footer that dumped on Buffalo.
Well, actually, I was in college at that time. And I remember specifically, I went to Canisius College in Buffalo. I was on the basketball team, and we played at St. Bonaventure the evening that the storm started to hit into the city. So on our bus trip back from St. Bonaventure to Buffalo, it started to snow, and then eventually we made it back to campus. It's only an hour and 45-minute ride. And then I remember waking up the next morning and looking out in the parking lot, and you didn't see anything. All the vehicles were covered. It was quite a trying time, not only at our university, it's a small campus, but we were running out of food eventually. Tanks and military vehicles were up and down the streets of Buffalo. It was a trying time for the city, for that region, but I do remember the spirit of Buffalo. And they are loyal, they're hardworking, dedicated, just wonderful people in Buffalo, New York. And I remember everybody kind of sticking together, working to dig other people out of snow, serving food, serving water, just, almost everything that's going on currently in Texas happened in Buffalo 40 years ago or more. But it was quite an event. But I just remember, you remember the events, but you remember more, coming out of those events and how strong-willed the people of Buffalo, New York, and their loyalty not only to the city but to themselves. I think you see it with the Bills and the Sabres, and they just love their sports there. And just like the Toronto with the Raptors and the Maple Leafs, it's a special group of people in that region of the country.
I just have a feeling that if there was a Bills game slated for the next day, it would have gone on. And there would have been a tailgate party, even if it was on top of 7 feet of snow. But,
Exactly.
Okay, so Jeff, one of the things I love talking about I love hearing is people's backstory. So can we just kind of go back and figure out what made Jeff?
Well, I go back to, where Larry Broughton and myself, where we grew up. We grew up in a little town, Portville, New York, a small, tight-knit community that was based on farming, small industry, hardworking people. But once again, people that are just care for others. And I think some of the qualities that I think I'd like to think that I have in me, many of those have been born out of my youth growing up in a small town that I would never change. Much like, you go back to the Andy Griffith Show in Mayberry, and people make fun of those type of situations now, but I grew up in that type of environment, and I would never change where I grew up, how I grew up, loving family, great friends. And, your foundation is the most important part. It's the most important part of a home, most important part of a person. And I'm very fortunate that I grew up in that type of environment. But good, strong, valued people.
Yeah, it's interesting if you go back, if, Hayden were to watch the Andy Griffith Show or even Leave It to Beaver, I grew up in small towns or small cities, and that's what it was like. It was really, I can tell my kids, hey, watch Leave It to Beaver. That's mom and dad. That's, I might have been Wally with my brother, and a sister, but it existed. That lifestyle existed where it was, I don't even know how to describe it, but these values and the way that people just communicated and friendship. You know what? Hayden's going to roll his eyes back, and it's just an expression, but we left our doors. We really did leave our doors open at night. We had no problem. There was no crime. And, I do live north of Toronto right now, and it's similar to that, but it's not like it was back then with, a small community of maybe 10,000 people. I lived in a 65,000 small city as well. It was really just a cool spot to grow up looking back.
I experienced the same things, Norm. I think it's, like I said, I've been fortunate as I moved through my life that I lived in big cities and mid-sized cities, but it never changed me from the foundation that I grew up with. And, even if you're living in a big city, you see things that happen, you say, boy, that would never happen where I grew up, or we didn't lock the doors at home. And if the neighbors needed some sugar or needed, something, hey, we ran out of hot dogs for the neighborhood cookout. Hey, just go down to the house, and the door's open, just go in and grab it out of the refrigerator.
Right.
Those are the kind of the times that I grew up in, and certainly Hayden, probably wouldn't recognize those, and a lot of us wouldn't recognize those in small towns anymore either. But I was like I said, I was very, very fortunate to be in that environment and around those type of people. And I think the one thing that I really learned that growing up in a small town is that people are around to lift you up, and it's small enough to know when people are stubbing their toe or falling down and need some help. People will rally around and lift you. And I think that's something I've always taken forward in my life, that, help people out, give people a chance. Others aren't as fortunate as as myself or people that maybe also have grown up with. And I think they have the same type of foundation and values that I think that, it's our responsibility now to lift others up and make them whole if they're broken. And those are the type of the things that you learn in a small community. And that's what I learned growing up.
Oh, that's great. So now you're in the small community. Where did you pick up your love for sports?
Well, it was mainly driven by, once again, the people in front of me. There's a gentleman who was a tremendous basketball player, Paul Dorman. He lives in Phoenix, Arizona now. His son Sam won a silver medal in the Olympics in Rio in diving. And you looked up to those athletes in front of you when you're in grade school and middle school. And boy, I want to be like Paul, or I want to be like, X, Y, and Z. And we had a robust, for a small school, we had a robust athletic program, and we had great coaches. And my high school basketball coach, high school football coach, when I was playing football, golf coach, everybody, they were just so supportive of involvement. And it was a great way of being part of something special, being part of a team, and learning to be a good teammate. And we were all encouraged, whether it was to be in the band or the athletics or anything that required teamwork. And I think, once again, that goes back to growing up in a small town, that, if the farmer next door needed help, baling hay and putting it in the barn, we were there to help them. If it was, someone digging a ditch, it's just the teamwork involved. I think it was part of the culture. Hey, you're going to be a part of something. And whether it's, helping in the workshop situation at the school where you're building something. Well, maybe someone needs help building a home or building a shed, or you're going to be on this team that's going to be playing basketball. So I think it was just inherently part of the community that you were going to be a part of something, whether it was the book club or athletics or business or music. There was something that you were kind of funneled in the element of working with others and being a part of a team. And I just took a love for sports and basketball in particular. And I had some great coaches, and my high school coach, Ray DeLand, was a wonderful person. And on top of that, just a great coach. And he taught us the value of winning, but also what you can learn from losing. And winning is great, but losing stinks. But you can learn a lot from losing. And I thought that was one of the things, that there was always lessons to be learned, whether you were winning or losing. And those were life lessons that you could take forward.
So from high school, you were on the high school team, varsity team. And where did you go from there?
Well, I was fortunate enough to get a basketball scholarship to Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. And once again, I go from a small town, small tight-knit community to an inner city school in Buffalo, New York. Now, Buffalo certainly isn't New York City, but at that time it certainly felt like it to me. And so it was a completely different environment. The learning curve at first was challenging, but once again, I was part of a team. And it's really one of the first times I was exposed to, certainly different cultures, different type of environment. And it was an awesome experience for me. Easily, I could have gone to a smaller school in a rural area and enjoyed that experience also. But going to Canisius and the values of the Jesuit community, the Jesuit teachers, and the leadership of the university, Father Dembski at the time, I was surrounded by really strong people who led for the right reasons. And it was a good experience at Canisius. Unfortunately, I injured my knee. That required a couple surgeries during college, and my college career ended rather soon. It was after my freshman year into my sophomore year, my basketball career ended because of knee injuries.
All right. So how did you deal with that?
Well, it was hard. And I go back, one of the things that as I moved forward and got into coaching, you always ask yourself, and I put myself in a young person's shoes, whether it's someone going to a school for a variety of reasons, whether it's someone wants to be a music major, a business major, be in athletics, be in another extracurricular activity. Would you still go to this school if you couldn't play basketball anymore? Would you go to this school if you injured yourself and you couldn't be in the marching band and you had a marching band scholarship? And I can honestly say that in my heart that I wouldn't change a thing. Canisius was the right place for me, with or without basketball. But it was a shock to my system because I enjoyed being a part of that team. So after my injury, I started, I was a business marketing major, and that's what I graduated with. And I found myself somewhat rudderless, not knowing, okay, I'm only into my sophomore year. What am I going to do? And we had a changeover of a coaching staff. So a new head coach come in and you think, okay, now he's going to take my scholarship away. I'm not of any worth to him. His name was Nick McCarchick. The assistant coach was Howie Dickerman. So you just never know. They're coming into a new environment. They want to build out a team of their own. So I thought I was in a doomsday mode. I thought everything was going to fall apart for me. My scholarship was gone. What am I going to do next? And come to find out that they were there to take care of me. They weren't there to run me away. So I would hang around the basketball office and be around practice. And then Coach McCarchick mentioned, hey, would you want to coach a JV team? So this might have been into my sophomore year. My junior year at that time. Would you want to coach the JV team? And another player, Richard Walsh, who was a good teammate of mine, had similar situation, injuring his knees. So eventually we coached the JV team at Canisius College. So that was my first taste in coaching. And once again, I was a business major, so I thought I was going to be selling insurance or working at a PR firm or someplace after I graduated. I had zero interest in coaching, never really thought about it. And then the next thing you know, here I am coaching the JV team with Richard and really enjoying it. And it was difficult because you're coaching young men at the time who were the same age as yourself. So it was kind of a challenge. Say, do they respect me? Am I teaching them well enough that are they learning something? And so you have those emotions also as a young coach, because many times you're coaching people at the college level that are close to you in age. So then eventually, I said, you know what, maybe this is something that I'd like to do. And Nick McCarchick and Howie Dickerman provided that opportunity to me after I graduated. I stayed on at Canisius coaching for a year on the staff, and I kind of caught the coaching bug. And
I have a question for you.
Sure.
And sorry to interrupt, but I'm curious about you're a young guy coaching the JV side of things. How did you change your mindset? How did you shift that from player to coach?
Well, it was hard at first, and I go back to a saying I think Teddy Roosevelt had at one point. Basically, people don't care about what you know until they know that you care. And at that time, I didn't know enough, but I think the guys knew that I cared about them, and I wanted them to succeed. We were kind of all navigating this rudderless ship going down the Erie Canal and trying to maybe get into Lake Erie, knowing we had 3 holes in the bottom of the boat. And it was a learning experience for me, but I felt like the players that we had, they understood that, hey, we're all learning this together. And it turned out to be a great, fun experience for me. But, I'd always go back. I think that's one of my favorite sayings is about, they don't care about what you know until they know that you care. And I think at that point in my life, I was kind of right in that wheelhouse with that type of thought process.
What about the guys? So we were talking about respect, or you were talking about respect. What about there's going to be those guys that we know those guys.
Oh, trust me.
How do you deal with that? Again, do you just, I'm the coach, and if you don't like it, basically take a hike, you try to work with them. What did you do for those guys? Well,
hey, I once again, you're a part of a team, and And you can't play everybody. And we tried, but sometimes that makes it worse because there's people playing that but for the most part, these weren't scholarship athletes. They were just regular students that were doing this, for exercise, the ability to be on a team. And I just thought that the players that maybe had lacked the respect for maybe my experience or my knowledge at the time, I felt that, hey, we're all in this together. And I kept working with them as the same way I'd be working with someone who was our starter playing most of the minutes and our leading scorer. And because I thought there were life lessons to be learned, not only from myself, but also for them. And we might as well learn them together. We're young. But you're going to have, even at the JV level, you had some players who were athletes in high school that were probably pretty good athletes on their team, not worthy of a college scholarship per se, especially at a Division I school, which Canisius was. But, we all have egos. We all have that sense of, hey, I know more than the next guy. But, I really thought that they respected that we worked hard at it. And we came every day with energy. We came every day with trying something different, whether it's a different drill, different offense, different defense. We did things to generate and motivate their minds on a daily basis. So I think the ones that were resistant and maybe lacked respect at first, I thought by the end of the season, those 3 holes in the boat were patched and we're sailing full stream ahead out in Lake Erie in this boat that certainly wasn't worthy of being on Lake Erie or Lake Ontario at the time. But we all came along together, and there was a lot of life lessons learned, but also a valuable lesson that you stick with things. You don't give up on people. And we all learn. We learn at different rates. We learn at different speeds. But I thought that was a great experience for me. And I like to think that some of the players that played for us can look back on it and say, hey, we had a heck of a lot of fun. We learned some stuff. But you know what? Those 3 guys that were on the team with me at that time, hey, we're good friends to this day. Or those 2 guys that I was, or 1 guy. And, I think that's the part of being a team. It's not a 2-year, 1-year, 4-year experience. You want to make it a lifelong experience for guys.
Right.
And you're not going to be friends with your whole team or close to them. It's great to see them at reunions and things. But if you have 3 or 4 of them, 2 or 3 of them, that you've been able to maintain a relationship with for long periods of time, then those are some of the valuable lessons learned, that this can be a lifelong journey for you, not just a 10-game, 1-season type of thing.
Have you ever thought if they did cut your scholarship, what would have happened?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question, Norm. I'd like to think that I would have stayed at Canisius. It probably would have been embarrassing. It's a small school. But I also know I knew that I couldn't help the team and from a playing standpoint because of my injury. But I think I would have stuck it out because that was the place that, go back with the first question that I asked myself, is if I ever got injured, is this a place I could see myself staying? And the answer at that time was yes, and I would have stayed. And because of the education that Canisius provided is outstanding, and I wouldn't change that. I think I made the right choice. And even if basketball didn't evolve out of that, I felt confident enough that what I was going to learn at Canisius, that would have been a great highway to go down, and opportunities would present themselves because it is a great Jesuit education.
How many years did you coach there?
Well, kind of my JV experience, and then 1 year after I graduated. So it was really probably 2 years in total. After that first year, I graduated. I stayed on for a year, and then an opportunity presented itself to go to St. Francis of Loretto, Pennsylvania, which is in the middle of the state, Western Pennsylvania. Once again, a Division I school, so the highest level of basketball. But Loretto, Pennsylvania, here I am. I grew up in Portville, New York, which is very small. I go to Canisius in the inner city of Buffalo, and now I transition into an opportunity at Loretto, Pennsylvania, that was basically 2 roads that intersected in the middle of nowhere with a stop sign. And I'm going, oh boy, what is this all about? But once again, it's I look back on all my years in coaching, and every place that I had great experiences. I always kick myself back to St. Francis of Pennsylvania, my 3 years there, because the people in Loretto, Pennsylvania, and that surrounding area were like the same type of people I grew up in Portville, New York. Hardworking, a lot of farmers. The coal industry at the time was big in that area. So just a lot of hardworking, loyal people. I had a great experience there. Basketball, we had some coaching changes that happened during my time there. I stayed on. The coach that brought me in eventually was Dave McGarity, who was let go at the time, and another person came in, and I was retained, or I was asked to stay. Dave had a tremendously successful basketball career after he left St. Francis of Pennsylvania. And actually, he is just finishing up this week, or next week, or this weekend will be his women's coach at West Point at Army. And he's retiring after this season. So he's only got a couple more weeks of coaching. And just a great man, a great family man. And he kind of gave me my first full-time, my first full-time coaching job. And that was at St. Francis of Pennsylvania with Dave McGarity. And a young man at the time, Jeff Bauer, was our student assistant. And moving forward, Jeff and I intersected several times in my 40-plus years in coaching.
And you've probably heard this a million times, but what makes a great coach?
Well, you know what? It's interesting because I was fortunate to work with, and I believe the research speaks that out of the top 10 coaches, winningest coaches in the NBA history, I had a working relationship with 5 of them. I think I'm the only person that can say that. You know, Pat Riley, the New York Knicks. Pat hired me to be his assistant coach with the Knicks. Don Nelson, the winningest coach of basketball. Larry Brown, I was Coach Nelson's assistant. Larry Brown, Lenny Wilkins, I was in the front office, assistant GM with the New York Knicks at the time. And then Doc Rivers, who's the current coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, I coached Doc when I was with the Knicks. So all of them have different styles. And I think that's a great thing about coaching. And I think it can be a life learning experience for anyone in any industry. There's a different way to be successful. Not everybody has to be the same. And when I look with the different leadership styles of those 5 people, you know, Pat Riley was hard work and discipline. And you bring the hard hat every day, you come to work, and we're going to be the best conditioned, hardest working team in the NBA. You know, Don Nelson was kind of outside the box type of guy. I remember when he hired me, he gave me his playbook. Hey, Jeff, can you organize this for me? I thought I was reading a different language. I've never seen anything like this before. But Nelly had, he was the first guy that, from a basketball terminology, he inverted players. He had his point guards posting up. He had his big men shooting 3-point shots. I mean, he inverted positions. He was really creative and outside the box. And actually, the way the game is played today, you see all the big players, the big men are shooting 3-point shots and extending out on the perimeter. That is all Don Nelson. And he was doing that 30 years ago. Larry Brown, one of the great coaches in NBA history and college history, he was ever changing. He would change offenses, defenses on a daily basis. One day a play would be called 4 up. Next day that same play would be 5 down. His was all precision-based coaching, movement, timing. Lenny Wilkins was just a quiet, confident type coach. And he led through a confidence and a quiet nature, not a yelling type coach. And Doc Rivers just was a heck of a player. He would always ask questions. He was always wanting to learn more as a player. So you knew watching some guys, you grow with him, you coach him, you say, and Scotty Brooks, who's coaching the Washington Wizards right now, and he's struggling this year, but he's been very successful over his career. Scott was one of our players also with the Knicks. And both Doc Rivers and Scott, they would always ask questions. So you knew that they were heavily involved in learning the game at a deeper level. So it doesn't surprise me that both of them have had great coaching success. So, to base success on anything in life, I think you have to be open-minded. You have to be able to say to yourself, hey, I think I can be successful this way, and believe deep in your heart that what you're doing is the right thing. And the coaches that I've been associated with, even on the college level, from Digger Phelps at Notre Dame to Pete Gillen at Xavier, Dave McGarity, Nick McCarchick, I've been so fortunate. And Mark Amatucci, who's was one of the great high school players of all time at Calvert Hall High School in Baltimore, Maryland. To this day, I thought he ran the best practices that I've ever been involved in. And I'm talking all the coaches that I just mentioned. He was a high school coach I thought was not only a great game coach, but I thought he was the greatest practice coach I've ever been involved with. So everyone has a different method. You can't, it's not a cookie cutter type of industry. And I don't think coaching or business or music, everybody has a different route to success. And you have to be yourself.
Right. Do you see in some younger coaches just common mistakes?
Well, I think it goes back to what I just mentioned, Norm. I think you have to be who you are, and I think if you try, I think a lot of young coaches, hey, I want to be like Pat Riley. I want to be like, and I think you see that sometimes with a lot of coaches, young assistant coaches who come from great programs, who are fortunate enough to get their own programs. So they get hired by a university or a team, and they come from a strong, stable head coach who's been very successful. Maybe he's a Hall of Fame type coach. You're his assistant. All of a sudden I get X job, and now I have the keys to the car, but I'm putting the same gas in that I thought my former boss was, and it's not working because he's trying to be too much like his former boss. And I think that goes for anything. Once again, it's who you are. Everybody makes a different type of smoothie every day. Basically, it's what you put in, the ingredients, and it has to be what you like. You pick and choose. And if I was to go back and be a head coach and be fortunate enough to be a head coach, I think I've from my experiences now, and it'd be different than a young coach, obviously, but I would be able to pick and choose from the many coaches that I worked with, pick and choose what I think might work for me. And it might not work for this guy, it might not work for that guy, but I think picking those details that I could use and build my philosophy from would be from the variety of people that I worked with. So sometimes it's hard for a young coach because they might only be experienced with one method, and it's been successful for that head coach. But as you move on to become a head coach, maybe using those methods, and it might not work for you. But it also is the delivery, it's the coaching methods, it's, there's a lot of things that go into being a successful coach. And sometimes being a copycat doesn't work. You got to be yourself and be true to yourself.
I've had some different businesses and they required salespeople. Now just think back in the day, right? Salespeople on the ground, knocking on doors, and you'd have a sales manager. And what I found out many times is I could have the best salesperson that would be working with me, maybe doing 2 or 3 times what everybody else was doing, and they'd get promoted to sales manager and do a terrible job, awful job. But yet, if they were back in their sales position, they loved it. And if they ended up back in sales, they quit very quickly, because they felt that they were demoted. So, I mean, just hearing what you were talking about is very similar to what I experienced in my early years in business.
Well, I think there's a lot of people in the coaching industry, including myself, that I never made it to be a head coach. When I coached at Notre Dame, I was with Digger Phelps for 5 years and John McLeod for 1 year. My aspirations were always to be a head coach. I thought I had the confidence to be one. I thought I could be a good coach. but it never evolved. It never happened for me. But I do agree. I think some people, they have aspirations of having the keys to the car when maybe sitting, and they say in our business, 18 inches is a big change. You go from being an assistant coach over here in that chair and you move 18 inches over and your world changes quickly. And I think I was really good as an assistant coach. And even though I felt like I was ready to be a head coach, maybe I wasn't. Maybe I'm never going to know that if I was because that opportunity never presented itself. But maybe I was that career assistant coach that did a good job and is better in that type of role. Maybe my skill set is better as an assistant coach. But I do think and I think with younger coaches, they're so ambitious and they're so anxious to be a head coach that they get themselves into a head coaching position that is bad. And similar to your situation, a guy is a great salesperson. He gets elevated to be the sales manager, and then everything goes off the rails because he's not comfortable. It's not the right situation for him. Maybe the commitment at that school for that coach isn't what he was led to believe when he took the job. And he fails miserably as a coach or as a salesperson. And especially on the college level, Norm, I think if you get fired, you walk around with the red X on your chest. Mm-hmm. It seems like the rest of your life in that business. Oh, you're the failure as a head coach. You're not going to get that opportunity again. You're not deserving of it. Look what happened when you were at this X university. Well, maybe that X university that told you you're going to get the new facility, that this number was going to be your recruiting budget, but actually you got there, it's only half of that. Instead of having 14 scholarships, so you only have 8. All those things you were told going into the situation, as you found out moving forward, were not. And that also has something to do with your failures. And you get deflated very quickly. Now, fast forward to the professional ranks. I remember being with the New York Knicks, and I was fortunate enough to be there 15 years. And I remember talking to somebody in the league, probably after 8 years in the league, and the Knicks. That was my first stop in the NBA. And I remember someone saying to me, "You've never been fired, have you?" And I said, "No, I haven't." "Oh man, that's going to be a great day for you." I said, "You got to be kidding me. I don't want to get fired." But then when it happens, people look at you differently, like, "Hey, you're part of the club now. Hey, we're all in this together." And you don't walk around with that red X on your chest like you do on a college level. It's like, hey, we get hired to get fired. That's how it is. And it has nothing to do with your abilities it's just whether change of ownership, change of management, change of whatever. But those things happen. So the viewpoint, how people view coaches being fired on the pro level, and people call it, well, they just recycle coaches. Well, that happens on the pro level. And many of them that are sitting on the sidelines right now are excellent coaches who are deserving of another opportunity. Whereas on the college side, you get fired, it's like, okay, you're gonna be selling insurance. You don't have a chance in this business anymore. And it's really too bad. But that's the difference between the two, I guess.
Wow. And why is it? Why can you basically wear the scarlet letter in college, and yet it's, let's call it the old boys club in pro?
Yeah, that's basically what it is. The thing about the NBA is you're not answering to the fans. You're not answering to the media. Many of the owners in the league, all they care about is winning and getting the right person in the job, and that person that might be right for his team at that time, whether it's hockey, football, basketball, baseball, might be someone who's been fired 2 times at another place. But he has a good relationship. He feels he knows the guy. He's thoroughly vetted him and him or her, and they feel going forward that, hey, this is the right guy for me. Now you go on the college side, you're dealing with alumni, boosters, people who are more concerned about perception maybe than reality. Well, why are you hiring this coach? He didn't do really well at this school. And we got this hotshot assistant here, or maybe this other head coach who currently has a job who might be better. Why are you going with this guy? So I think the pressures around the college administrators may be a little bit more because they answer to the fundraising element of the school. They answer to the alumni of the school, which is also part of the fundraising, the endowment. And they're probably a little bit more media friendly too, because they need, most of these schools are competing against the professional ranks for, inches in a newspaper or time on a television. So, maybe that's part of the reason. I'm not specifically sure, but it just seems like there's a lot of colleges that want to win the press, the press room the first day. They want to win the press conference, and they're not looking 2 or 3 years down the road. I think that's happened to a lot of places. Mm-hmm. They want to make the big splash and make it look good and put all the bells and whistles on the press conference instead of putting somebody up there that might be questioned because of lack of past success. But in the long run, he's the right person for the job. So sometimes it's winning the press conference.
So, Jeff, you were at St. Francis. Where did you go after that?
Well, after that, I transitioned to Loyola College in Baltimore, Maryland. And at that time, that's where I connected with Mark Amatucci, who was a very successful coach at Calvert Hall High School in Baltimore. Mark jumped from the high school to the collegiate ranks. Mark was my coach at Loyola, and that's where I experienced him with, as I mentioned, I think he's the best practice coach that I've ever been around as far as utilizing all members of the team, multiple baskets at the same time. He just kept everyone moving and doing different things, but it was always there was a reason it seemed crazy at the time, but there was always a method to the madness. And to utilize every basket in the gym, every player in the gym, every coach in the gym. So I was with Mark at Loyola for 1 year, and then an opportunity presented itself for me to go to Xavier of Ohio with Pete Gillen. And Pete was an assistant coach at the University of Notre Dame. I grew up a huge Notre Dame fan listened to the radio growing up, Notre Dame games on the radio, Notre Dame football. And when I went to Canisius College, I started working basketball camps during the summer. And I worked several camps around the country, in particular, University of Notre Dame. And the gentleman by the name of Scott Thompson, who was the assistant for Digger Phelps at the time. And really, Scott deserves a lot of the credit for the success and the opportunities that I've had, because he exposed me to Notre Dame, number one. He exposed me to the Notre Dame coaching staff. And Pete Gillen was part of that coaching staff at Notre Dame. Eventually, he gets the Xavier job, and then he hires me because he knows me from working the camp at Notre Dame. And then he also hired another coach from the camp at Notre Dame by the name of Skip Prosser, who was a very successful high school coach. And then Skip eventually became the coach at Xavier. Then he went to Wake Forest. Skip and I lived together. Then at Wake Forest, he was very successful. Then he unfortunately had a heart attack and passed away at an early age. So Pete provided me with an opportunity when he left Notre Dame to meet him in Cincinnati at Xavier. And at that time, I knew, because Coach Phelps had a pecking order at Notre Dame, and many of the coaches that he had came from his summer camp. So eventually there was an opening at Notre Dame. Jim Barron, who was Digger's assistant, left, and ironically, he took the head coaching job at St. Francis of PA, where I used to be. Jim also worked at one time at Loyola, Maryland, where I used to be. So it was just Jim Barron and myself are kind of tied in a knot on a lot of this movement also. So I knew when I went to Xavier that eventually I was going to go to Notre Dame, and Pete Gillen was the conduit for that. So I spent 2 years at Xavier with Pete. We were very successful. Jim Barron left Notre Dame, the opening provided there. for me to move there with Coach Phelps. So it was kind of a quick 3 years between my time at Loyola, only for 1 year, and then Xavier for 2 before going to Notre Dame for 5 years. So, but still, you hate to leave places. Sometimes you feel like there's unfinished business. I expected to go to Loyola, and I think sometimes in this business, you expect to be at a place maybe longer than reality. And I really like living in Baltimore. It's a great city. And I thought that I was going to be there a long time with Mark, but then this opportunity presented itself at Xavier with Pete. And then I knew with Pete that eventually I was going to go to Notre Dame. That was just kind of part of Digger Phelps's coaching plan for his staff.
So you stayed there for 5 years. What ended up happening after that?
Well, I was at Notre Dame for 5 years, 4 years with Digger Phelps, and then he retired after my 4th year. And then myself and another assistant coach, Fran McCaffrey, and Fran's the current head coach at the University of Iowa and having a great season. Fran and I were kind of dangling in the wind, wondering who is Notre Dame going to hire? Is there a chance that he'll keep us on the staff? So Notre Dame hired a coach by the name of John McLeod. John was a longtime NBA coach. He coached the Phoenix Suns. He was the head coach for 18 seasons. And then he was also the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks and then the New York Knicks. So he was fired by the New York Knicks, and then he got hired at the University of Notre Dame. So I did not know John. Fran did not know John. But probably the good thing for both of us at the time we didn't realize that because we were concerned about keeping our job. But John came into the office. He didn't boot us out. He said, "Hey, I want to work with you guys for a couple, 3 weeks and see how it goes." And eventually he kept both of us on the staff at Notre Dame. So, and John passed away a couple of years ago, just an unbelievably great human being, a heart of gold, and maybe the nicest person I've ever met in my life. What happened was it was during the summer of my first year with John, after we did 1 season, he came to me and said, "Pat Riley has an opening on his staff with the New York Knicks. Would you be interested if I called Pat for you?" And I said, "Sure." Now, I've never would have thought about the NBA. I was happy in college. I was enjoying my experiences at Notre Dame. And so he reached out to Pat for me because Pat had an opening on his staff. And the one thing he mentioned to me is Pat takes his time in hiring people. And this was the middle of June. And so Pat mentioned to John, "Hey, have Jeff send in his resume." And so I sent my resume in. Now it's middle of June, middle of July. I didn't hear anything from Pat. So I said, well, maybe I'll send him something. So I sent him like a scouting report that I did. At the time, it was on UCLA. And then another few weeks went by, I didn't hear anything. So I sent him a video edit that I did for a scouting report, my scouting report on UCLA, just to try to keep my name in the mix a little bit. And now here it is, September 1, and I didn't hear from Pat Riley, and I'm figuring I'm just going to be here at Notre Dame. Nothing's going to happen there. And about the middle of September, I get a phone call from Pat's office saying, "Hey, can you be here tomorrow in New York to visit with Pat?" So I flew to New York, visited with Pat, gave me a couple tapes to break down, and gave me a couple days. I submitted some reports, and he hired me. So fortunately, I got hired as an assistant coach, advanced scout. And then secondly, I had to leave Notre Dame immediately because training camp was starting in a week with the New York Knicks. So I go from not really knowing what's going on to getting a job with the New York Knicks, really not knowing what's going on. Because here I am in training camp all of a sudden with Charles Oakley and Patrick Ewing and John Starks and Herb Williams and all these players, and my head is spinning like a top. And terminology is different, but that's how I got introduced to the NBA through John McLeod, and then to go and work for Pat Riley, who is, probably the greatest coach ever in basketball. And I put him right with, he's in my mind, he's there with Scotty Bowman. I'm a big hockey guy. I'm a big fan of Scotty Bowman and his success that he had with his championships. But Pat was a wonderful experience, great learning experience, but he also worked extremely hard. So you knew with Pat you were all in the same boat. It was a lot of hard work, but a lot of fun and rewarding.
So was he as disciplined with you as the players?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the requirement was, and actually my first year as an assistant coach with him, I was in charge of opponent preparation and scouting. So I was ahead of the team all season long. So I was probably 2 or 3 games ahead preparing basically playbooks and personnel reports on each of our upcoming opponents. So my travel schedule would have been maybe 26. I still had a home in Indiana at the time, so 26 days on the road per month, different city every day. So I might be scouting the Washington Wizards today. Tomorrow I'm in Los Angeles scouting the New York Knicks. And then the next day I'm in Miami scouting the Miami Heat. So it was a couple cross-country trips every week, a different city every day, which required a lot of self-discipline because you're by yourself, and the demands that Pat put on you, not only I don't say they were demands from Pat. I think there were self demands that I put on myself, because knowing that Pat demands excellence and perfection at all times, it was a hard year, from health, wellness, sleep, all those things that come from traveling and different hotels every night. But it was, but Pat had his own way of doing things. Like every report had to be on blue card stock. Every report required you to use a specific type of ballpoint pen. So his attention to detail is like nothing I've ever seen before in my life. So, I go from Notre Dame next week into my head spinning at training camp to a complete blast furnace, traveling the country and in different arenas every night. And then after the game, trying to put together a 20, 30-page report. And the way I looked at it, Norm, and at the time, it's funny now, but at the time you're saying to yourself, this is nuts. My goal at night was to have my report completed, go down to the front desk and at the hotel and fax the report to Jeff Van Gundy, who was our assistant coach and another great NBA coach who now does TV for ESPN and the NBA. I'd fax it to Jeff's house, and you just hope that the 35 pages that you fax, the confirmation comes back 35 for 35, because there's a few nights that you hand over these documents to someone at the front desk at the hotel, and you say to yourself, I hope they all go through, and then you get 32 out of 35. So then you send it again. Now Jeff's fax machine at his home is completely, blowing up right now. And then you stand in the hotel lobby because you think these are state secrets that you're emailing or faxing, because we didn't have email at the time. But my goal was to get to sleep before the USA Today was dropped outside my door at the hotel, which is around 4:30 in the morning, it seemed like. But then you get an hour or two sleep, you catch the first flight out to the next city. So it was a treadmill, but it really taught me some valuable lessons in self-discipline, staying organized, getting things done in a timely manner. There's some great life lessons learned outside of basketball, but using basketball. And I think that's one of the big things that I've been very fortunate with, Norm, is I've been able to use basketball and the life lessons I've learned from it to help me in my personal life. In my, even though we all had failures, I've had plenty of them. I think that a lot of the things I've learned I can attribute to many of the coaches I worked for, and Pat Riley. Certainly, I learned a lot about myself during that time.
Was thinking about this and being involved with sports for so many years. What do you miss most about the NBA or sports in general?
What do I miss most about not being in the sport right now, or not being in athletics? And it's a locker room. Some people will say, oh, it's the game. Hey, you're sitting at Madison Square Garden with 18,000 people and you're playing in the NBA finals. And no, it was the locker room. I'm being with those guys and it's kind of a sacred area.
Hmm.
And we're the only people that you really count on each other in that room. And it's almost like I know I mentioned music a few times because I remember, you live with these people. You travel with them every day. You're at the hotels. You're in the locker room. You're on the team buses. You're on the team airplane. And it's a family. And they have arguments. They have fights. And some players don't like others, and they're selfish, and but it's like a band. Like you could go out and play a game, and you win a game, but deep down you didn't play your best, and there was plenty of errors that as coach you could point out. It's like Fleetwood Mac playing or someone like that, and knowing that the bass guy was off tonight, or the Eagles, or he was good, but I could tell he was a little bit off. Or God, the drummer, he missed a couple. So you count on each other. It's a team sport, but like people on the outside would never know that the bass guy missed a couple things. But you're so tuned in as a team that if something just wasn't right. And just being in the locker room, I really, really miss that. That was a special place. And between the pregame speeches and preparing to play, it was kind of cool. And one other thing is kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. You talk about team dynamics and stuff. We and this isn't, you don't have to put this on or anything, but in 1994 with the Knicks, we were struggling. This is the year we went to the finals and lost in 7 games to the Houston Rockets. But we were struggling. We lost like 4 out of 5 or 4 in a row. And we were on that Texas swing and heading out west. And Pat Riley, who was probably the ultimate motivator that I've been around. We're flying from Phoenix to Sacramento, and I see him go up. He gets out of his seat, goes up and talks to the pilot. And soon after, we're starting to descend, and I'm going, we're not in Sacramento yet. He put the team down in Reno and said, I don't want to see you guys for 2 days. Gave them each $500 out of his pocket as they walked off the plane. The trainer set up to have hotels, and he made those calls on the plane and had some limos there for the guys. And just get away from, basically Pat was saying, just get away from me. I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to see you. And we just got away from each other for 2 days. Came back and won 15 straight games.
Jeez.
So just something simple that wasn't simple. That was a complicated landing a plane, but just a different voice. And Pat was really good about that. Just, okay, it's time for Jeff Van Gundy. You take practice today, Jeff. They've heard me enough, that type of stuff. So it's kind of everybody has a different way of motivating people, I guess. And Pat was really good at it.
It's back in 94, 95. This is completely off topic, but one of the best memories I have of that year was with the New York Knicks. So they came in, they were playing Toronto, and a friend of mine, I did a lot of work with Nortel at the time, and they got us front row seats to watch the game at Maple Leaf Gardens at the time. And Space Jam was out. So Hayden came with me. He was just a little guy at the time. And something very simple happened. But Patrick Ewing was on the court shooting, and he just kind of looked over and just gave him a little nudge, right? Like a head bop. And that was it. I mean, it was just like one of the coolest things that have, and I remember that to this day.
Wow.
How long with the Knicks for? 15 years.
15 years with the Knicks. Yeah. Okay. I was 8 years on the coaching side.
Yeah.
And then 7 years in the front office side, assistant GM, director of scouting. And then that term ended. And that was the first time I was ever fired in my life.
So you joined the club.
I finally joined the club. Took a while.
Okay, so I got to ask, how did that feel? Did it feel like you were joining a club, or it was, oh my God?
Well, obviously it's not fun.
Were you expecting it?
I was.
Yeah.
I knew it was coming. So there were some things that went on during that time that I just knew that it was going to come to an end. So I was fine with it. But it's hard because I think anytime you get fired from a job, whether it's in sports or any type of industry, you find, I shouldn't say you find out who your real friends are, but you do find out who your real friends are. But I hate to categorize a lot of people in that, because sometimes people who are friends of yours don't want to call out or reach out to you because they just don't know what to say. And I can understand that too. That's hard.
Yeah.
But I found out that there were some people that I was involved in the industry that I did not hear from. And to this day, I have yet to hear from them. And I thought that we had better relationships than that. But, I think a lot of times in professional sports, there's a lot of superficial friendships. And I've kind of found out where that line was drawn. So, but that's life. Hey, that's the way life goes. But, I try to tell these young people that might be involved in coaching or getting out of college. And there's a couple of young men that I'm kind of mentoring right now, one from Syracuse and one at the University of Maryland, that are interested in the sports industry or just industry in general. And I say, number one, not everybody's making the money the players are making. So I think that's the first thing that people have to realize, that, it's a different pay scale. And number two, you're going to probably eventually get fired. And number three, that's not always a bad thing, because other opportunities present themselves. And after I got fired from the Knicks, actually I started a nonprofit organization with a dear friend of mine, Ray Stoltz, in Elkhart, Indiana, when I was still with the Knicks. And part of that was driven by having some conversations with some friends of mine who were in the military or had family in the military. And they mentioned to me how, boy, this is really tough on the spouse, or the kids are really struggling. So, I could understand the issue with the spouse. And it really hit home with me when they mentioned the children. Mm-hmm. And so I started this organization through Jeff Nix, who at one time was one of our assistant coaches with the Knicks, who just happened to be the head coach at the time of the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And I said to him, hey, Jeff, I want to try something. I want to try to get something off the ground. I want to try to get some kids from Fort Carson to come to one of your basketball games and provide them kind of a 4-hour pep rally, getting them off the base at Fort Carson in Colorado Springs to the academy. Many of these kids have never been on a college campus in their lives. And just to kind of provide them a distraction from mom or dad, or both in some cases, fighting in a war in Iraq at the time. And he said, hey, that'd be a great idea, and this and that. So, you run across people in your life that change your life for you. And Jeff providing this opportunity to do something like that at the Air Force Academy for these military children also gave me a chance to get involved with the family programs people at Fort Carson, which eventually led me to have a relationship with General Robert Mixon, who was a commanding general at Fort Carson. So I lined up all the buses. We had charter buses. We brought them up to the Air Force Academy campus. Jeff Nix had his basketball team after the game meet all the kids. So we had 200 kids, I think, at that event. And they all got in a line and they met the players and they signed autographs and they signed posters. And it was so fulfilling for me that for this 3 or 4 hours, I was able to provide these young kids and their mother or their father or their grandparents. And I'll never forget seeing this lady with 2 kids, and they fell asleep during the game. So after the game, I said, hey, is everything okay? I said, your kids really are very respectful and very nice. He said, well, these are my grandkids. Mom and dad are both overseas fighting in the war. And I said, wow, that really hit home for me. So we started that. And then General Mixon said, hey, Jeff, you're onto something really, really special here, what you're doing for these children. But it can't, at the time I called my organization Fort Carson's Kids. He said, you need to go national with this. This is bigger than Fort Carson. So we need to come up with some ideas. So eventually we kicked around some thoughts. He said, let's name it Camouflage Kids. And I thought about it for a minute. I said, that's ideal, because I go back to my first reaction when I was talking to this military family member. He mentioned the spouse. And that's what people think about when they first think about the spouse. And the kids are kind of camouflaged. And we called it Camouflage Kids. I took it out and we went national with it. We did all the academies. We did colleges and universities in the Midwest. Our biggest event was at the University of San Diego because of the big military presence there with the Marines and the Navy. We had upwards of 800 kids for an event there. And Ray Stoltz and myself, we had fundraisers. We had a big fundraiser at his home every year. And sports personalities, Michael Peterson and music showed up. And it was just it was the most fulfilling. And I've had a great career in sports, but being able to do something for our military, especially these children, and the notes you get from the parents, how grateful they were for your time, that was the best thing I've ever done in my life. That knowing that not only I gave them that experience for 2 or 3 hours, but when they spoke to the team members and the coaches at these schools, and they tell these kids, hey, you belong at Michigan. Tom Izzo tell them, you belong at Michigan State. Tom Crean, who was the head coach at Indiana at the time, hey, you study hard. You're going to be an Indiana Hoosier. Or Mike Bray at Notre Dame. And hopefully we inspired some kids to study harder and work harder on their academics and extracurricular activities, so they would have an opportunity to experience college when the time came, that they'd be prepared. So that was the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my life, is try to hopefully make an impact on young kids, that their dreams will be realized with going to college and fulfilling some of their dreams.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. How long did that last?
Well, I just dissolved it within the past year, unfortunately, just because the time involved to raise money, and it became challenging, especially economic times. It was a good 15-year run with it. But just getting on the college campuses, getting coaches involved, getting some student athletes involved. A young lady in Buffalo, New York by the name of Spring Sanders. Spring was at Nichols High School in Buffalo, All-American lacrosse player. She became a member of my board of directors. She went to Northwestern University, was a captain of the great women's lacrosse team at Northwestern, got a master's degree, and she's just a great young lady. And to know that she had the ambition to help me when I did an event at the University of Buffalo, actually for a football game at UB and a basketball game at University of Buffalo. She was heavily involved, but that's the type of person she is. So for 15 years, it was a great ride, but sometimes time and energy, it just becomes hard to sustain. But I think the impact we left with some young kids, I'd like to think is positive, and it's going to give them some life lessons that they can take forward.
So it sounds like it was an amazing organization. Did you ever hear any of the kids afterwards?
I did. One of the things that evolved out of this is I set up a scholarship in memory of Skip Prosser, who I mentioned earlier, who passed away as the head basketball coach at Wake Forest University. Skip and I coached together at Xavier, as I mentioned. We were roommates, actually. So I put a scholarship in his name for some of these children. And we were able to provide scholarships for kids going to college from Fort Bragg, Great Lakes Naval Station, and also Fort Carson. Wasn't a lot of money. It was money that we could raise. One was a $5,000 scholarship. A young lady out of Fort Carson, she ended up going to the University of Denver. She wanted to study pharmaceuticals and become a pharmacist. And so I heard from her and her father. Some of the kids that we were able to impact through that avenue was really great. It was great to hear from them and know that they were grateful for what we were doing. Yes.
I heard that you ended up going to Iraq over this.
Yeah, actually through a gentleman by the name of Rick Cal and the USO. Rick is an unbelievable person, and he works now with the David Faraday organization, a great golf personality. But at the time, Rick had his own organization. He worked with the USO to provide college coaches or professional coaches the opportunity to go over and visit our troops. So on 2 occasions, I went over with about 7 other coaches to Iraq just to visit with the troops. We coached. We each the second time we each had a team that we coached, kind of like a Final Four type tournament, and we just gave them an opportunity just see someone not in a uniform, see someone that they could just come to in the gym and sit and talk to, and just kind of hear them out and watch them in action and how they. I mean, I remember our first night we flew into Mosul, and we flew at night all the time between forward base operating, the operating FOBs. So we flew from Kuwait. Our first night we flew commercial airline into Kuwait, and then military airline into Iraq. So we flew in with the troops. We were stuffed in a C-130, packed to the gills, and here I am. We got our Kevlar and our helmets on, and I'm looking across from me. Our legs are all intertwined, and I'm looking at like a 18-year-old young man, 19-year-old young man going to war. Like I couldn't believe I was in this situation. And we couldn't land in Mosul with like a long flight approach. We had to do a spiral entry to land. So it was interesting. You're in a C-130 kind of going in a spiral coming into land. And we land, we get in like 4 a.m. We just put our heads down to get a couple hours sleep. And unfortunately there was an explosion, and we're in the same barracks with all the military personnel. There was an explosion in Mosul, and it was such a eye-opening experience to see them in action. Helicopters are up, tanks are on the ground. I mean, it was something that I'll never forget in my life. And it was just a life-changing experience on both occasions over there, that you could be a part of their life for a minute and see how they're living, but also provide them an outlet to talk to someone who's coming from the States that maybe have questions, not only about basketball and sports and things like that, but just kind of, hey, life in general. Hey, what's going on back there? Because they're so busy protecting us that they don't know exactly what's going on back at home. But it was just a great experience. I think I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about our military and how proud I am, not only of the U.S. military, because our allied friends were all there too, and working with us. So I think it was just a wonderful opportunity that Rick Kell and his program provided all of us as coaches. And I think it made us better people. I think we're more compassionate people. I think I remember going to the dining hall in Mosul, and this was our first experience with a meal on a military base. And we walk in, and here's Iraqi citizens serving the food. And they were the women were so grateful. The men and women, they're serving pancakes and eggs and soup. And they were so grateful that we were there providing them an opportunity, and a risk involved for them to be doing this. But they knew they were in a safe haven. And just the smile on their face, you just said thank you to them. A simple smile that they could give you during this most unbelievable time in their life gave me such a warm feeling that, boy, the human spirit is really alive, and it's good. Even in war, there's some rainbows. And I saw a lot of rainbows with the Iraqi people. They were just really wonderful people to be around.
Yeah, Hayden, you remember when we were talking with Tomer?
Yeah.
He was saying the same thing during the Serbian War, that it's a horrible experience, but there were rainbows.
Well, I can also speak to that a little bit, Norm. I used to run a basketball camp in Croatia. When I was at Notre Dame, we had an arrangement with the club teams in Croatia to run a basketball camp in the town of Pula. And it was called the International Basketball Academy. So I was in charge of it. I brought over American coaches to participate every summer. It was like a 10-week program. And my last year there, you could sense, because we had kids from all over Europe, but most important, primarily, it was from Serbia and Croatia. And we could sense the tension involved. And I told Farouk Kalenovic, who was helping me run the camp, I said, Farouk, this is the last year of this camp. You can tell. Because unfortunately, even though they're young kids, you could sense the tension between the Serbian kids and the Croatian kids. And then soon after that, the war started. It was really sad. But I was back in Croatia a year ago this week. And I had a chance to see some of my friends over there before the virus exploded. And it was great seeing them and visiting with them. But once again, lifelong memories and just a little round ball that you pumped up that has provided me the lifelong dreams and aspirations I'd never ever thought that I'd get the opportunity.
Yeah, talk about world experiences, just being able to do everything that you've done. Now, you also touched on mentorship a little earlier on. So how important is that, and how important is that to younger people trying to reach out and learn the game?
I think that's important. And I think, the one thing that I've been very, very fortunate, obviously, you've heard the history here of my experiences in basketball and with the military, and is, I think I have a lot to offer young people, not just from a basketball perspective, but I think I've been able to be around a lot of life experiences, and we all do that when we get older. And I think we owe it as an adult with experience to help the youth in our country and the youth around the world if we can. And I think many times we get so involved in our own career that we don't look to give back. And I think that's the one thing about the coaching profession in general. I think they're very giving people. And I think the music industry, and I always bring this up because I'm so, Michael Peterson, Neil McCoy, another country music artist, is a good friend of mine. The way that they give back to people and they care about others. Coaches are the same way. And I think there's an extreme crossover that we'd be doing a disservice to our experiences if we didn't provide any type of assistance to the youth in our country and youth. And I think today's world, especially right now with what we're dealing with this pandemic, is you have a lot of young people who are really struggling. They're struggling for rekindling friendships that maybe have kind of disintegrated because of this virtual world we have to live in right now. The opportunity to participate in sports or marching band or school activities that have been washed away for a year. I think everybody's looking for, there's so many of our youth are rudderless right now. And because of that, sometimes bad things happen. Sometimes there's kids that obviously depression is a big issue. Drugs and alcohol can be a big issue. You have just a lot of kids who are looking and hoping that someone would reach out and say, hey, how can I help you? What can I do? And I've been very fortunate. It's kind of weird how it all worked out with these two young men that I'm helping now a little bit. Is back in December, I had to have cataract surgery in New York City. So I'm in the hospital in the city, and the CFO of the hospital stops by my room. They provided me a nice room. I was lucky enough, once again, I feel fortunate that I had someone who knew somebody that got me a private room just for the short amount of time I was there. So the CFO came down, and I said, hey, anything I can do to help, here's my business card, let me know. And so he reached out to me a couple of weeks later and said, hey, my son's up at Syracuse University. He's not sure what he wants to do. He's got an idea what he wants to do. Would you be willing to talk to him? I said, of course. And so I reached out to his son. His son said, hey, do you mind if I bring another buddy of mine who's at the University of Maryland to get involved in the conversation? I said, of course not. So, my 3 or 4 hours I've been able to spend with them so far have been so fulfilling. And not only for me, but I think I've helped them. One in particular is trying to get an internship with a professional sports team that I have some connections to. So I reached out to that team. Hopefully they'll consider, his application a little more seriously now. So, but some of the questions that they ask, and I think we're all we all have an opportunity to learn something every day. And I hope I'm giving them something, but they're giving me more. And I think that's the way, if you look at life, we learn more from being givers instead of takers. And my friend Joe Sweeney, who I hope is going to be one of your guests at some time down the road, that's what he'll talk about, is you learn from giving. And it was interesting. I had a chance, and I go back to some of my experiences just through my Camouflage Kids organization and doing a program at West Point. And I did a program for the basketball. We did a hockey game, a basketball game, and through my association with West Point, there's a gentleman who was a former college basketball coach at the time, Dr. Ralph Pym. And Dr. Pym ran the competitive sports programs, which basically is, at a lot of colleges, would be considered intramurals, but there it's on steroids. You're talking parachuting and ski jumping. I mean, at West Point, it's a whole different level of competitiveness. Combat arms, all kinds of different course loads that they have to graduate from West Point. So Ralph reached out to me and said, "Hey, Jeff, you're up here at the academy. The cadets, they listen to you, they respect you. They get a lot out of when you're here, not only when you bring one of your events here, but when you come up here and just hang out with them for a couple of days and talk about things." He says, "I have a position open on my staff or within the department that I think you would be perfect for. It's a 1-year assignment at West Point." My eyes lit up. I said, "This is it. This could be one of the greatest opportunities of my life to work at West Point." But then Ralph said, "Unfortunately, Jeff, you don't have a master's degree." And it broke my heart. I was going, "Oh man, I have a chance maybe to get to West Point to experience that great institution." So I hung up the phone. I called Canisius College. I'm 50 years old now. I called Canisius College and I said, "I believe you've started this sports administration program. How do I get involved?" So they had a master's of sports administration. I went back to school at 50 years old. And some of it was kind of based on a remote learning, but I made it it was important to me to get in the classroom. So I'd go back and forth from my home at the time was in Indiana, back to Buffalo. And I'd go to class, I'd sit in on class, I would participate and talk in class, talk to the other students. But I learned so much from them at 50 years old.
Wow.
Than I did when I was 18 or 19 in college. And I know I was sitting in a classroom with kids who were just out of college, 22, 23 years old. And they were probably looking at me, "Hey, old man, you don't know what you're talking about. This is how things are today." So we'd have a give and take and go back and forth. And hopefully they learned something from me, but I learned an awful lot from them. But it was so I basically what I'm saying is, I'm saying to myself, I'm never going to have an opportunity pass through my hands again because I didn't have the qualifications. So at 50 years old, I went back and got my master's degree, but I learned so much more than just getting a master's degree, just being in class with some of those younger students that saw the world through a different lens than I see it through. And right. It opened my eyes to seeing things differently. So it was an awesome experience.
And I bet those younger students learned a ton from you once they got to know who you were.
Well, I hope so. I think they respected some of my life experiences.
Yeah.
And then, and then now you fast forward to where I am now and pretty much retired from the sport of basketball, but also know in my heart that there's more that I could do to help people. So, working with these two young men right now, and hopefully anybody that's listening to this podcast that would like to get involved, I would certainly like to help and mentor anybody that I can, particularly young people. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be someone with a sports interest. It could be someone that has, a business interest or, whatever. like I went to college and I went to be a veterinarian to start with. So I changed my major 2 or 3 times. So, I understand that you don't have, the feet under you. There's always an earthquake under you when you're young, trying to find your level ground and level playing surface because you don't know. And it's like a test tube, and you're throwing everything in at once, and eventually you'll find your way, but it might not be easy. But it's nothing to be ashamed of, to try something different.
That would be I couldn't even imagine. I'm 57 and trying to go back to university to do an MBA. I don't even know where I'd start. Because, life happens, right? And all of a sudden when you graduate and you're out there and you're doing things, okay, 5 years pass, maybe I go back 10 years, but going back at 50, congratulations, because that would be tough. All I can say is for an old guy, I'm an old guy, going back to university to get an MBA, that would be tough.
Well, you know what, I admire you. Hopefully you go through with it. But I will say this, you go through life and a lot of your inspiration or your energy doesn't come from within. And I'd like to think I speak for a lot of people in saying this, but sometimes you need to be nudged a little bit and you need to be challenged. And Dr. Ralph Pym at West Point challenged me. He didn't tell me I needed to go get a master's degree, but I knew in my heart down the road, if there was ever an opportunity that required a master's degree, that I better go get one. It's certainly not at the MBA level, but it was something that interests me, that also required, obviously business courses and sports related themes that interested me. But even now at 62 years old, I'm saying, okay, what can I do next? Maybe I should go to a tech school. Why am I paying a guy $90 to change my oil on my car? It's little, just little things like that. Just go. I find some interest in, my big interest and my love that I've always had has been in aviation. And when I was at Notre Dame, I always wanted to get my pilot's license. And because I love the challenge, I love the thought of being up in the air. I love flying. And so I went and got my pilot's license. And that was the greatest achievement of my life from a professional level, because it gave me a chance to, you get up at 10,000 feet and you don't care about anything going on the ground other than you hope that there's a paved asphalt that you can land on when this thing's over with. But, you forget about all your worries. It's great because I get to work with mathematics and compass and feet and altitude, all those type of things that make your mind race at a fast pace. So I love aviation. I'm almost obsessed with it. I love tracking airplanes. I love, finding out what's going on in the airline industry. Unfortunately, a few years ago, I had some medical issues, and I lost my medical, which doesn't provide me with an opportunity to fly at this time. I still have my license. I just don't have the medical that goes with it. But, maybe I could probably go back and get it cleared now. But that was a big challenge for me. It's something that I had to prove to myself, that I can go up in a plane by myself and successfully take off, fly it, and land it. And I've been able to do that several times, and I love it, and take some family members and friends with me doing it and having them experience it too. It's been fun. It's been fun. I've been able to do a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm just waiting, to hear what the next thing's going to be. So you got to keep me posted, by the way, Jeff.
Well, it's been fun. It's been a good life. I have no regrets. It's been fun.
And we probably covered a couple of these questions, but what's been your biggest struggle or your biggest hurdle?
I would say, Norm, probably my biggest issue has always been, and you'll probably think I'm crazy when I say this based on my experiences, but it's always been confidence. It's been self-confidence. I think I've struggled at times to really deep down in my inner soul to really believe strongly in myself and have the confidence to really tackle things. I've been able to accomplish a lot of things, but I think it always comes back. I always question myself. I'm always God, am I really worthy enough to do this? Am I competent enough to do this? Where I should be saying, hey, I'm ready. I'm going. I could do this. So that has probably been the one area that, whether it's my personality, whether it's just my lack of confidence. I had that in school growing up. I had it. I was always the guy that would sit in class and say, boy, I don't want to do this book report today in front of the class. Boy, I hope the teacher doesn't ask me a question. I don't think I'm prepared, even though I knew I was prepared, but I didn't think I could get it out, my voice, that I knew what I was talking about. So I think lack of confidence, I think the lack of personal strength at times is something that I think I deal with today.
How did you get over it? Or how do you get over it?
I think, once again, I think it's all in preparation. I think I've been good throughout my career you have to be coaching in spontaneous decisions. The game happens so fast. You're flying a plane, things happen so fast that you have to be able to make spontaneous decisions. But I think through preparation, and whether it's scouting reports, studying, preparing to fly by studying the weather conditions, preparation would provide me with the confidence to make spontaneous decisions. And I think slowly I've been able to overcome a lot of my anxiety for having confidence issues through preparation. If something gets thrown at me where I'm not prepared for it, then I think I revert back a little bit to the confidence issue. I have a lot of uncertainty at times. So it's always a give and take. But I think through preparation and preparing for situations, and the one thing about aviation and flying planes, you always have to think ahead. If this plane runs out of fuel right now, where's my alternate airport? You have to be aware of other traffic in the sky. Little things like that you prepare yourself. So you have to be forward thinking. And I think I've been pretty good at that in my preparation of things. But if I get hit quickly with something that maybe I'm very capable of handling, but I'm not prepared, at times I find maybe a confidence issue at first. And I have to work through that through my mind a little bit, even though I know I can do it. It's just lack of preparation at first.
Right. Okay, well, let's swing it over to what's been your greatest success?
I think helping people. That's been, I go back to my camouflage kids, and I think you can take, and I talk about camouflage kids, but I also talk about, I don't have children, and I remember Mike Krzyzewski, the great coach at Duke, and I just happened to see it the other night on TV, where they interviewed his wife about when he had his third daughter, and how his wife was disappointed that, hey, Mike, I'm sorry, we had another daughter. And he was beyond elated. That's awesome. I've got 12 sons. I have them every year with his team. And I think that's how I look at it also. I look at, without having children, but I've had 12 kids every year for 40 years. And those relationships that I've had, and some are really solid, long-term friendships. Some are occasional. Some might be, the reunion type. But I do think deep down in my heart and their hearts that if something was needed, and I know when in need happens, everybody comes to help. And so I think those relationships, that's been the success. That's how I measure my success. It's not measured in wins and losses and things like that. It's measured in relationships. And I looked at it, like I said, I've had 12 kids every year. They're not all perfect. We've all had problems with them. Some have been very successful. Some have struggled. But I do know that we're all there to help each other in times of need and support each other when needed. And so I think that has been the most successful piece of my life, knowing that I've been able to help kids I've coached. Now I'm trying to help some young men and women who I'm mentoring. So that's how I measure success, not by wins and losses, revenue on sales, rankings and standings in wins and loss. It's success with people. It's people's success, and that's how I measure my life, and I'm very fulfilled. I think I've had, if I measure it in those terms, I'm the most grateful and lucky guy in America.
Well, I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast today and just spending a little bit of time and getting to know you. I really appreciate it.
Well, Norm, it's been great. And, I go back to a lot of different things in my life. And, I'll never forget, and bless his soul, Kobe Bryant, the great basketball player. This is one story I'll say, and obviously when you have a lot of them in where I've been, but I go back to Kobe. We worked him out when I was with the New York Knicks when he was coming out of high school. His agent directed him to come to New York to work out. Kobe had zero interest in working out for the New York Knicks. I think his agent wanted to get him to New York for some media attention. But, so I was one of the guys in charge of the workout. So I worked Kobe out, probably about a 45-minute workout. And he was kind of going through the motions and things like that, even though you could see he had supreme talent on the basketball court. And I always heard that he was really a bright kid. He had a great vocabulary talking to him. He was wonderful to be around, but his heart really wasn't into a workout for the New York Knicks at the time. So the workout's over, and I'm a little bit frustrated because I wanted to get a good workout for the coaching staff and for the, the front office. And so I said to Kobe, I said, hey, I know you're going to come to the NBA, but there might be a day next season where you wish you were playing for, the University of North Carolina or Duke and going to that math or history class in college. Kobe looked at me like I had 10 heads. And I'm going, wow. So fast forward now, I'm coaching with the Knicks, and we're fortunate enough to be coaching the 2000 NBA All-Star game in San Francisco. And Kobe has been in the league now for, I don't know, 7 years maybe, whatever it's been. And so he sees me because the East team practiced first, and then the West team. So we were coming off the court, and the West team was coming on the court at what is now Oracle, or was Oracle Arena. And Kobe sees me and he says, hey, Coach. Hey, Kobe, what's up? This beats that math class at Carolina, doesn't it? And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that he remembered what I told him. And we both had a big laugh and a hug. And that was one of the most special days that he was really a bright young man, but it's just such a terrible, terrible tragedy. Mm. And what he had going outside of basketball, success, his family. But I'll just never forget that. That was really a fun experience, and just his memory, because people told me he's really a smart guy.
Yeah.
But I obviously hit a nerve when I mentioned that to him, but he remembered it.
Oh, that's good. So at the end of every podcast, we always turn the tables and we ask our guests if they know a guy.
Well, I have the perfect guy for you. His name is Joe Sweeney. Joe lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He's a man of many, many areas, from business to sports, radio, television. I mean, he would be a great guest for I Know This Guy and for you, Norm. And you could talk for days with Joe Sweeney. He's got 4 books out, I believe. First one was Networking as a Contact Sport and Moving the Needle. And he has a great book out now. Got a couple out now, but one in particular about this nun that he became really close with in Milwaukee, and kind of her life in general and how she lived her life. And, Joe and I were working for the Detroit Pistons one day for 4 years, but Joe's a very dear friend. I call him my wingman. Everybody needs a wingman in life. And Joe calls me one day and says, hey, I was just in Detroit. And I said, Joe, why don't you call me? Oh, I took a bus over. I said, what do you mean you took a bus? He said, yeah, I put like $20 in my pocket. I took a bus to Detroit, and I lived under the bridge for a few days with the homeless because I wanted to experience how they lived. I wanted to really experience what that life was all about and learn some lessons from them. Then he got on the bus and bus back to Milwaukee. He was a very successful businessman and sports personality, but he wanted to find out for his book how other people struggled and made it and how we could help. And he'd be a great guest for you. He's a character. He's got some great stories, and he's lived a great life. I think he'd be a great resource for your show.
Oh, that's fantastic. I can't wait to reach out and meet Joe. But thank you again. It's been a pleasure talking to you and having you on the show today.
Norm, I can't thank you enough. This has been awesome. And hopefully I'm worthy of doing this with you and the success you've had. Congratulations on your MBA moving forward, hopefully. And it's been a great experience for me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So Hayden, wasn't Jeff great? One of the things that I really liked throughout the whole show is everything was about giving. So you talk about, working with players, the mentoring, the charities, everything that he's done in his life. It's all about giving or giving back, which was, pretty incredible.
Yeah, you can tell that was like so central to his entire career, which was totally unexpected. I was not, expecting that from a high level coach and like GM, assistant GM. I mean, I think that he's very clear with why he was doing this throughout his whole career. And that was a big surprise.
Well, one of the things that surprised me was one of his last answers, and that was, his biggest struggle and him struggling with confidence. Who would have thought?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy what you can find out about people who are successful and like those little things that, because on the outside it looks like one thing, but there is that battle there for them. But even to talk about that on the show was pretty special. I mean,
yeah. So I like the transparency side as well. And the other thing that I'm looking forward to, maybe a little anxious about, but having Joe Sweeney on.
Yeah, he sounds like a wild card.
Yeah. So I can't wait to interview him.
Yeah, same. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll see you next time.
Until next time.